Hi everyone, and welcome again to another episode of the Songbird Sade Knits podcast. A podcast mostly about knitting, but also about other woolly-based crafts. Sometimes sewing, sometimes natural dyeing, sometimes crochet, and hopefully someday soon also some spinning. But for now, mostly about knitting. And thank you once again for joining me. If you're new to my channel, a very warm welcome to you. And if you're watching, if you've been following some of my other videos, welcome again, and thank you so much for your comments and subscribing to my channel and reaching out to me in general. I really appreciate it. It's really, really nice to read comments and to connect with some of you. So thank you for doing that. And if you feel so inclined, please leave a comment. I do my best to answer in a timely way. And also, if you feel inclined, please like and subscribe. And you can also hit the notifications bell if you want to be notified when I release another video. Because I do try to do this on a monthly basis, but I've noticed in the summer not finding enough time to do it. So yeah, I missed June, mainly because I was very busy out in the garden. But I did knit a lot in June, so I have a lot to show you today, which is one of the last days in July. So yeah. This is Zimet. She's one of 3 cats in our household. She's the eldest and by far the most sociable, so she's really happy to be here joining us today. I think she really likes the attention. So, okay, so let's talk about knitting. The first finished object that I have to share is this beautiful Summery T-shirt. This is a pattern, a design by Jessie May, and on Ravelry, I think it's Jessie Made Designs, M-A-E-D Designs. And I've knit one of her things before, which I talked about in my last video, and it was just a cute little tank top, and I really enjoyed the pattern. Her patterns are, I would say, very very elegantly written. They're very logical and not overly complicated, just very easy to follow. And also her designs look very simple, but once you get knitting them, there's always a little bit more to it than it seems there will be when you start. So I really enjoy that. And I found that to be the case with this pattern. This is called the Summer Secret top. I think it is called the Summer Secret Tee. I'll definitely post that in the notes, what it's called, so you can find it if you want to knit it. It's just a dropped shoulder t-shirt. It has some oh, sorry, Zimet. Sorry, hon. It has some increases. It's knit bottom up, and it has some increases to the underarm. And there's a little bit of shaping, shoulder shaping. And then other than that, it's just a really oversized t-shirt that fits really well. I was a little bit worried that it would be too big, and it turned out, I think, to be exactly the right size for me, with the recommended ease, which I think is up to 10 inches ease. And then, of course, the other really lovely detail about this t-shirt, and this is optional, she does in the pattern write several different options for the hem finish as well as the sleeve cuff finish, and I opted for the folded hem, which I'd never done before. It was very fun to do and very satisfying. It creates just a really, really a very sturdy edge, but also a very neatly finished edge, and I really like that. I'll probably use that on some other knits. I'll try to give you a little bit of a close-up of what that looks like. Yeah, so I love that. And basically, if you're unfamiliar with this folded hem technique, it involves knitting for a certain length, then creating a purl ridge, and then knitting for an equal amount of length again. And then that bottom edge gets folded up. And then various different ways you can bind that off together at the top, or you can, if you've used a provisional cast on at the bottom edge, you can then basically pick up those stitches and continue knitting from there. And the purl ridge creates this sort of rounded finished edge right on the bottom. It's a really, really lovely technique. That's probably my favorite thing about this shirt, that and the fit. So overall, I'm really happy with it. I mentioned in one of my Instagram posts recently with a different knitting project that while I was knitting it, I was really unsure that it was going to work out properly for me, and that this happens to me a lot with my knitting, and it happened with this as well. I really liked it when I did the folded hems, but then once I got to the neckline, I thought it looked messy, and it just wasn't looking the way I had envisioned it looking. Actually, I should mention, she gives different options for the neckline, and I don't know if this one's in her pattern, but I just did this for myself. I tried a couple different things and it was too tight, which happens a lot with me. So what I did was I did a 3-stitch I-cord bind off, which is basically an applied I-cord. And I used larger needles. I think I went up a full millimeter in size, possibly even a millimeter and a quarter, to make sure that it wasn't tight, and that worked out perfectly. And it gives it a bit of a decorative edge. Anyway, even once I had finished that, once I had figured out what kind of neckline I wanted and tried it on, I thought it was too cropped, and I thought it kind of flared out in a funny way. But as with most knitting things, once you block it, all the stitches kind of meld together a little bit better and relax. And it did grow a little bit in length as well. It was probably cropped right at my rib cage here, and it grew just a little bit in length after blocking. And the weird flaring out, while it does do that a little bit still, it looks a little more natural now after blocking, and I absolutely love it. I wore it all day today, and it's a perfect addition to my summer wardrobe, as I had hoped it would be. And the yarn that I used is a really lovely yarn. It's BC Garn Bio Balance. It's 55% organic wool and 45% organic cotton, and I believe this is from Denmark. It doesn't say on the label, but I do think it's from Denmark. And I don't know the colorway, but it's sort of a bit of a lilac gray color, kind of just an overall washed out stony hue that is maybe more like taupe, might be a better way to describe it. So I'll just show you, that's the skein band, and then that's the color. It's probably a bit darker on camera than it is in real life. It's a lot more gray and washed out, sort of faded looking in real life. Yeah, but you can see it actually is a bit of a heathered colorway. And this yarn's really beautiful. It's it definitely has a woolly texture to it, that sort of fuzziness, but it has the softness of cotton, and also that sound that cotton has. I noticed after I knit this that none of my other woolens sound like this. It just has a sound to it. So it's a nice yarn. It is a little bit warm still, so really good for this morning when I wore it out of the house. It was about 20 degrees outside and it was just perfect for that. So yeah, if you're looking for a nice summery yarn, I would recommend trying this one. It was very nice to knit with, very soft on the hands, and because of that wool content, it will be a little bit more forgiving of sloppy stitches, or you know, when you block it out, it'll kind of smooth over any irregularities in your knitting, more so than if it were just cotton. So I really like that. I haven't really knit anything in just cotton yet. I mostly stick to wool, and that's in part, I mean, it's mostly because I love wool, but it's also in part because I love the way a finished knitted garment made out of wool can really look like this really beautiful cohesive project, and I don't have to worry too much about details. I think my knitting is still pretty neat, but I'm not one for seeing every single detail of each stitch, so I don't mind if the wool, the fuzziness of the wool kind of blurs those effects a little bit. So, and especially for something all in stockinette, you know, your stockinette might be really good, but then it's almost inevitable. Say if you drop a stitch and then you pick it back up again, that stitch gets a little bit twisted somewhere, and in something like cotton, something that's really crisp, you might end up seeing that. But with the wool, it just kind of smooths over those kinds of little irregularities. So yeah, this is my newest addition to my summer wardrobe, and I can absolutely see myself knitting another one of these, maybe in a bit of a brighter color, like a golden yellow, or even like an orange. I'm looking out my window right now, and there's well, there's lilies out there, but there's also I just can't remember the name of it. Calendula out there. That's a beautiful color of orange. I really like that color. So something like that would be really lovely, perhaps in linen as well. So yeah, we'll see if I get to that stage. Probably not this summer. A little later on, I will share with you a little peek at my stash of yarn that I've accumulated, you know, over the years, but also a lot in this past year. I think the pandemic meant shopping online was more appealing and also necessary in some circumstances. So I acquired a lot of yarn, almost all with very specific patterns in mind. But I have come to the realization that if I don't buy any more wool for an entire year, I still will have entire patterns worth of wool to knit up. So so I am going to try to not buy any wool, especially for myself. I have bought some wool in the past month, 2 sweaters worth for different people as gifts, and I think that's pretty much all I'm going to buy, and I might try to stick to it for an entire year, unless I go to a yarn festival at all. So I hope to go to the Kawarthas Fiber Festival, I think it's called, Kawarthas Yarn and Fiber Festival in Ontario, and that usually happens in early June. And of course, because of the pandemic, I missed this year. They didn't have it, and then I was going to go last year, and of course they didn't have it then either. So if they do decide to put on the festival next June, I would really like to go, as I've never been. So that would be my only exception. So yes, hopefully you can help me stick to that goal and I will just try to get through some of my stash. So in this trunk is where I keep most of my wool, which is good because it fits a lot. I will say, for the most part, I have plans for all of these skeins. And then, of course, there's some leftovers from other projects. But you can see there's a lot of wool in here. There's double and triple layer of goodiness, woolly goodness. Slightly overwhelming, but also very exciting. And actually, speaking of stash yarn, this top was made with yarn that I purchased over a year ago for an entirely different project, and I had started on it and just I wasn't getting it. It was the Tegna T-shirt by Caitlin Hunter. I don't think it's a particularly difficult pattern, I just wasn't in the right headspace for it. So I had to abandon it, and then after having sat on the yarn for so long, I realized that actually I wanted to knit something else with it, and maybe I'll knit the Tegna in something else. So anyway, so I feel good about using up some of this yarn. I still have that one skein left, and I might make a bralette, also another pattern by Jessie May. So yeah, we'll see about that. Other finished things. Okay, I'll show you this. I'm really happy with this. This is the sweater I was talking about when I mentioned on Instagram that I wasn't sure if I would like it as I was knitting it, and I love the yarn, absolutely love the yarn. It's Lopi, Icelandic yarn, gorgeous, one of my favorites. But as I was knitting it, I couldn't really envision how the whole piece would look when it was done, and it turns out it's amazing. I wear it so often. It just has it has a shape and a fit that goes with everything. It goes with any kind of dress, any kind of skirt, any pants, any shorts. It has a great fit, and I think it's partially because it's cropped but not too cropped, and it's a little bit oversized, so it's a really good design, and it's very popular. So obviously many people who knit this also feel that it's a very good design. And it's the Big Love sweater by Anka Strick on Ravelry, and knit and let Lopi. And it's a cardigan, an oversized cardigan, not too oversized, maybe. Anka's pattern recommends 10.25 to 14.25 inches of positive ease. I'll put it on for you. So it has this lovely shawl collar. I kind of sewed mine at the top just so that it didn't flip up on me all the time. I don't know if it would do that or not. I just, I know that I didn't want it sort of up around my neck. I can always undo that if in colder weather I find I am wanting to do that with it. I can certainly undo that. Yeah, so it's a really, really lovely design. I love wearing this sweater. It has, you could certainly put a pin or a button there and wear it more closed, kind of like a little jacket, which was my intention, but I've found I really don't mind it being sort of more loose and open, and I can, if I'm sitting down, I can easily just wrap it around myself, and then I don't have that extra weight of a pin sort of pulling on it when I don't want it done up like that. Yeah. I don't know if I'd make this again because as I said, I wasn't sure that I was enjoying the process. And I think that mainly had to do with the fact that this is an all over texture pattern, and you knit in all different directions, and you pick up stitches in all different places, and then you have to reestablish the textured pattern, which is not difficult. It just took a lot of thinking sometimes, and sometimes I'd have to knit a little bit until I realized whether or not I had got the sequence of the pattern correct. And yeah, I guess that's the part that I just found a bit frustrating, not being able to understand the knitting as I was going along. And you'd think it would get easier as you knit through it, but it didn't. Some of the connections that had to be made up in this area were, they weren't challenging, they were just, as I said, I'd have to knit a bit and then discover that I wasn't quite right, so I'd have to unknit. And I don't know if that was me not following the pattern correctly and maybe missing something or making a mistake and then having to compensate for it, or if that's just the way the pattern is, that once the textured pattern is established, it's up to the knitter to then continue with that and figure out how to keep the sequencing correct as you knit in all different directions. I don't really know. I just figured whenever I encountered this difficulty, if just reading the pattern verbatim wasn't helping me, I could just figure it out on my own anyway. I could just figure out how to get that, reestablish the textured pattern. So that's what I did in some cases. Yeah. It was an interesting knit, I will say that. If you like knitting something that requires a little bit of thinking and maybe keeps you guessing about what the overall shape is going to look like in the end, or maybe like what section you're knitting and how that's going to turn out, this is a really good pattern for that. It's a very modern type of construction. We have another kitty who's just joined us. I don't know if she'll come on screen, but just saying hi to her. But I will say that it's an amazing addition to my wardrobe, and I am trying to consciously knit things for my wardrobe that I don't have, or that I would like and can envision myself wearing a lot of. So this has very much delivered in that respect, and as the weather cools into late summer and early fall, I can see myself wearing this just every day. So I'm very happy with it. And this yarn is the Lopi, as I said, by Eilifos in Iceland. And if you haven't knit with it before, it's a funny yarn. It's a gorgeous yarn, one of my favorites. But it is funny. I think it's rated as an Aran weight. But it can be knit in very different ways, depending on the needle size you use. So it really is flexible in terms of the gauge that you're going to be knitting it at. And this is a more like open gauge, which is really nice because it's also a very fuzzy and hairy yarn. And if you knit it at a more open gauge, it'll fill in all of those spaces anyway. So it's lovely, very light, very squishy. And I used the colorway Oatmeal, which is a warm sort of gray, almost taupe actually. Try to show you that too. I feel the color is just not coming through at all. This looks purple on camera. It's not purple. But as I said, a little bit of the taupe. Yeah. So that's the Big Love cardigan. Okay, another finished piece that has actually taken quite a long time to knit. I don't know when I started this. I can't remember. I know I talked about it in episode 1 or episode 2 of the podcast. It's been a few months anyway, and finally I'm done, and I'm really happy with it. So this is the Hedge Witch shawl by Nat Redwolf. I think I said her name wrong in the last episode. I think I said Redwood, but it's red wolf. But she lives on the west coast, possibly among the redwood trees, so that maybe that's why I got confused. Anyway, so this is the finished Hedge Witch shawl. It's a big shawl. So it's a triangular shawl, a symmetrical triangle, and it has this all over beautiful texture that reminds me of little wings. It's just so pretty. It's a really, really nice texture. I know that I've seen other knitters knit this and then use that textured pattern for other knits like socks and other things, and it's a really lovely pattern, so I could see myself doing that too. And then it just has this garter detail at the bottom, which just gives it a little more interest. And it's a big shawl, as I said. It's just so cozy. It's perfect. It's just like the perfect shawl for outside in the fall. It'll be very warm, and I love the way it looks. I love how rustic it is, and I love it. This is probably my first shawl that I've ever knit, or that I've ever finished, and it's ideal for me. It's just my style. So I can't wait to wear this a little more. And for this I used Briggs & Little. I think I used their Regal, which is a worsted weight, I believe, and I used Heathered Brown for main color, which is a lovely, lovely sort of yellowy brown, actually. Yellowy grayish brown. It's a heathered yarn. It's lovely. And then on the bottom I used their dark, it's not sheep's gray, I know that. It's just a dark gray, and also really lovely. And Briggs & Little is a Canadian yarn that I think is spun in the East Coast somewhere, I think New Brunswick, and it's all Canadian wool and then produced in Canada as well. And it's also a very rustic yarn, very affordable if you're in Canada, and a really lovely yarn. I've knit quite a few things in this wool, and at different weights as well, and all of them turn out so soft, not itchy in the least, and very durable. It's to this day still one of my go-to favorite yarns, so I couldn't be happier with this beautiful shawl and this beautiful pattern, and I'm really happy to have it done, because sometimes with shawls, I think because anyway, with this type of shawl where you're just increasing to create the shape, at some point it just feels really daunting because it's only getting bigger. You're only knitting more and more and seeing less and less of your progress as you go along. So it can be hard sometimes to keep the motivation up to finish these kinds of shawls. But I just pushed through in the last month on this one because I just couldn't wait to wear it. So I'm really very pleased with this one. Well, I think that's it for finished knitting. I think I have finished a couple other things, like smaller things like hats and that kind of thing, but maybe I'll show you those things at another time. Might have to let Zanette out as well. Anyway, yes, I'll be right back. Go on, Zimmy. Go on. But, well, this is sort of like a semi-finished object. I was really into the idea of knitting a couple of the ranunculus sweaters, but they're all cropped, but short sleeve versions, lightweight for summer to wear over top of dresses. So I bought a few different yarns with a mohair blend from a local yarn producer, Wellington Fibers. They use Canadian wool, local wool to them, as well as mohair from their own goats, and then they spin it at their farm, which is awesome, and the yarn is gorgeous. So I bought a few different skeins of that, and had planned on making several ranunculus sweaters with that to go with different summer items. And anyway, I did a little bit of a swatch, and not really a swatch, I kind of just started knitting, which is what I always do because I don't do swatches. But I'm not used to knitting at such a loose gauge. I'm a very tight knitter, and for the most part, I have to knit sometimes a size larger than what I need because I knit so tightly, and I like oversized clothing anyway, so it kind of balances out. But the ranunculus knit in a fingering weight mohair is very, very open gauge, and I just wasn't sure that I was going to like that as a garment. So I made the ranunculus in a different yarn, another stash yarn that I have. This is from Barocco, and it's called Quechua. It's spelled Quechua, and it's a gorgeous blend of baby alpaca and baby alpaca, yak, and I believe lamb's wool. I'm not sure about the lamb's wool, but definitely baby alpaca and yak. So you can imagine it's just so soft, almost silky. It's beautiful. And this one was a DK, so I made the ranunculus in a DK, and I enjoyed knitting it, and it turned out way too small. It does fit, but it's not the oversized garment that it's supposed to be, and it looks like a child's sweater, and that's because of my tight knitting. So what I did, once I got to this stage, I realized I'm gonna have to undo this and knit it again. So I went on to Ravelry and looked at, because I don't knit swatches, usually what I do before I start a pattern is I go on to Ravelry and I read through most of the projects and try to pick out if anyone, or if multiple people have had to go up in a needle size, because if that happens, that tells me that there are other tight knitters out there who found that to get the gauge of the pattern, they've had to go up in a needle size, so use larger needles to get a tighter gauge that's written in the pattern, and that tells me that I will almost certainly have to do the same. So that's how I kind of get away with not doing gauge swatches up to this point anyway. But this time I didn't look at the pattern pages at all, or the project pages at all. I just started, and sure enough, when I went back and looked at the project pages, I found, I don't know, maybe 10 or so people who had to go up a full millimeter size in their needles to get what the pattern gauge was. So that tells me I will have to do that as well. So I think it's knit on 5mm needles, and many people went up to 6mm, or maybe it's on 6mm, and many people went up to 7. I'm not sure, but I'll of course check before I start this again, and I'll just do what those people have done, and hope that that'll turn out. A full millimeter difference in needle size should create quite a difference. So I have to do this one again. Hopefully I'll get a ranunculus done before the end of summer so that I can actually get to wear it in the summer. But as you're going to find out, I have other projects on the go, so maybe I won't finish a ranunculus in the summertime, but that's fine. Yeah, I guess that's all I'll say about that. And then another work in progress that I have several works in progress right now that are just sort of sitting at, sitting on the side. I think I talked about them in the last episode as well. I'm working on a blanket, and I'm working on a Cowichan style sweater, and I haven't really touched those for a while because I was trying to get this done and I was trying to get my shawl done. So now that I've finished those, it's kind of like a treat to myself to cast on something else. So I will certainly go back to those other works in progress, but I couldn't resist casting on something else and digging into my trunk of yarn to find what I wanted my hands to work with next. So I cast on for the Woodford's Cardigan by Elizabeth Doherty, and I think this was possibly published by Brooklyn Tweed, but I'm not sure about that. Anyway, the designer is Elizabeth Doherty, and I'm almost done the very first section of the pattern. And I can't even remember. I know this is like the upper back part. I don't know if it's the collar. I don't think it's the collar. I think it's just the back. And I know that this will be the full width of the back. Eventually it's sort of smushed up here, but it'll sort of be the shoulder width here along the back. And it's in this broken rib pattern. So this is another pattern that I've wanted to be knitting on for a few months now. I probably purchased the pattern in the fall and then got the wool around the same time. And it's just been sitting around waiting to be explored, and I'm finally doing that. Cardigans are so useful, and I was encouraged by my success with the Big Love cardigan. So I want to make another cardigan that I hope will be as practical and wearable. So I'll keep you updated on my progress with that. And the wool that I'm using is a very special wool, very different than some of the other yarns that I've used lately. This is from Custom Woolen Mills, which is in Alberta, so Western Canada. But if you live in Eastern Canada, or if you live in closer to where I live in Ontario, you can buy some of their yarns from Topsy Farms. I don't know if they carry this one, but they carry some of their plant dyed yarns. So that's nice if you want to buy a couple things, but don't want to have the shipping all the way from the west, and you want to have a little bit less of an environmental impact when you order your wool. So, and maybe there are other places other than Topsy Farms closer to where you might be that would carry this yarn, and you can try to order from them. But it is a really beautiful yarn. If you can order it and you're interested, I do recommend it. This is their single ply. They call it a superfine single ply, which is like a fingering, and it's just a single ply, and it's kind of unevenly spun, and that's, I think, part of their thing as a mill. They use a mule spinner, and I don't know anything about a mule spinner. My camera just stopped recording, so sorry about that hard cut. I was talking about this yarn from Custom Woolen Mills. The mule spinner, I don't know much about it, but it creates yarns that are perhaps a little more rustic and uneven, intentionally so, and more lofty. So not a super tight spin, and it almost has a hand spun quality. And I'll just show you. I think this is going to bloom really nicely once it's washed, and I can kind of guess because the ends, you can see that it's really tight here where I haven't really touched it or worked it too much yet. But the ends that have been, rubbed a little bit more and handled a little bit more are already blooming a lot. So once this is all knit up into a sweater and then washed, I think it's going to have a really, really fuzzy quality and be really lovely to wear and still very light. So I'm really excited about this. I think it's a great project for this yarn because it's a very simple sweater with just a texture, a nice texture. So the yarn will be able to show itself, and I'll really get to be familiar with its qualities. And yeah, it's a nice way to get familiar with the yarn, is to knit something simple with it. Not that the sweater is a simple knit, but the overall appearance of the sweater will be very simple and elegant. So the yarn will get its chance to shine. And this is a dark gray. I don't know what they call it on their website. It doesn't say on here, but it's a dark gray, looking darker on camera than it is. But it also is quite actually a bit of a warm gray as well, which suits me really well. I need a little bit of warmth in certain colors, and in the sun it just has like a bit of a brown undertone to it. And I think that's also because this is not dyed. This is one of their natural colorways, so it's like a white wool, undyed white wool blended with some brownish gray, so it does have some brown hue to it. So yeah, I'm really enjoying this project so far. Okay, so that's probably mostly it for today. I think I'll show you a little bit of the garden afterwards, because that's been occupying a lot of my time, and it's also something that I really love to do, is to be out in the garden as much as I can. So I'd love to share some of that with you. Before we go outside though, I just want to show you, this is what I've most recently purchased for gifts. So I'll just show you some of the colors because they're really beautiful. So this is going to become a Lopi made with Lopi, which is their bulky weight yarn. And so that's a classic Icelandic yoked sweater. So this is going to be the main color. This is a color called Sheep Sorrel, and it's a heathered burgundy, burgundy color. Has some orange in there, some blue, some green, dark gray, I think. It's a gorgeous color. I have been looking at it online and wanting to buy this color for a long time, so it's really nice to see it in person. It's a gorgeous color. And then this is I think it's called a beige tweed. This is one of my favorite ones, actually. I've made a few things in this colorway before, and I love it. It's beige with some sort of caramel in there, some white, some black. It's really nice. And then there'll be black in the sweater, and then also a little bit of this very icy sort of gray color. It's not really white, it is gray, but it has a real icy quality to it with flecks of black. And then I'm gonna make another sweater as a gift, and this is also Icelandic wool, but this is the Lopi, so it's a bit lighter, a bit thinner, not as heavy and bulky like the classic Lopi. And this one's just two colors. So the main color is this gray, and I don't recall what they call it. I think they also change the actual names of colors all the time. Even if the color stays the same, if the colorway stays the same, they sometimes just use different words to describe the colors. So I don't know how helpful it would be, but it's kind of a light gray. It actually might be called light ash. And then the contrast color on the yoke for this one is, this is called Acorn, and it's a heathered rich medium brown with some caramel in there and certainly some gray. I'm going to try to show this to you because it's a really nice color. That actually is looking pretty nice. It's still lighter than that, but you can kind of appreciate all the different colors in there. It's kind of like old leaf litter on the forest floor, but in a really nice way. All right, so now I will take you outside. Hey, Prairie. Hello, sweetie. This is the cat condo out on our patio. Hi, Nemo Pum. This is Nemo, and the white one is Prairie. They like to be out in the garden as well. Here we have some phlox in bloom, and it's right by our bedroom window, and this is the first time I've ever noticed how lovely phlox smells, and when we go to bed at night the smell wafts through our bedroom and it's really beautiful. So I think I'll plant more of this next year and kind of deal with this garden bed a little bit, make it look nicer, but I might even add more phlox. And we have rain barrels on either side of our house, which are just amazing. This is a swamp rose. I think I need to maybe prune it a little bit to get it to bloom a bit more. I'm not really sure, but I transplanted it last year, so I kind of just wanted it to grow before I cut it. And these are kind of our main garden beds in the backyard. There's some stuff blooming right now. This is, right here we have bee balm, that's the taller one, and liatris is the spiky one beside it. They're both native plants to this area of Ontario, so very good for pollinators. You can see the yellow in the garden. There's well, some is coneflower. This is a coneflower right here. Rudbeckia. Also echinacea. And then the other, there's a yellow flower up there. That one is silphium, also known as cup flower. And we also have black-eyed Susan right there. And yeah, our garden's pretty big, so I'm not going to show you all of it today. Just a few little things. This is a dogwood that, wow, it's flowering again. I didn't realize it flowered twice. It flowered in, I think, early June, and then stopped, and now it's flowering again. And dogwood also has a really nice smell, kind of like, a little bit like jasmine, actually. It's one of my most favorite plants. What else? More bee balm here, 2 different types. And then this is beard's tongue. It's had a long blooming cycle so far. It's pretty much almost done. As you can see, it's going to seed. But this is the remaining of the blooms. They're gorgeous. And over on this side, oh, I can't remember what this is called. I think it's called meadowsweet. Oh, there's a bee on it. It's also a native plant. If you're familiar with Ontario and you've been to Cottage Country or Algonquin Park area, this grows abundantly on the shores. You'll often find it mixed in with sweet gale and other plants that like a bit of a wet environment. However, it's growing here in the garden and it seems to be pretty happy. I guess because where they grow, it might be on a rocky shore, so yes, it's on the edge of a lake, so it's wet, but it's also rocky, so it probably goes through dry spells as well, whereas in a garden it's kind of always a little bit moist. And the honeysuckle's also blooming. It has a long blooming cycle as well. It had aphids earlier, and you can kind of see like some of the damage from the aphids. But it seems to have bloomed despite that, so that's lovely. And yeah, that's just a little bit of our garden for now. Maybe next time I'll show you the mushrooms. Well, the mycelium. There are no mushrooms yet. Thank you for watching. See you next time. Happy knitting and happy gardening.